If you're renting in Canada right now and you feel stuck and on the sidelines, you're not alone. In a few minutes, I'm going to walk you through a rent versus buy comparison using realistic numbers from Greater Vancouver. So if you're renting and on the fence, this is the part that you don't want to miss. Before we go into the math, I want to be clear about the main premise this comparison is built on. I personally invest in real estate because I take a long-term view, not because every moment is a good time to buy. Markets can absolutely overheat if you're forced into bidding wars where reasonable offers are ignored and only extreme overbids get attention. Like we saw back in 2018 to 2021, that's often a sign of speculation, not healthy buying conditions. But when you zoom out, my belief is that over long periods of time, highly desirable assets such as quality real estate, stocks of strong businesses, precious metals, etc., tend to rise in value relative to currency. Not because they magically get more expensive, but because money gradually loses purchasing power through inflation. At the same time, wealth itself is often stored and grown through ownership of these assets. As people accumulate capital, they don't suddenly consume dramatically more goods. They deploy that capital into assets that they believe will preserve and grow in value. Wealthy individuals and institutions compete for ownership of these limited desirable assets. That competition, combined with inflation, is one of the reasons asset prices often outpace income growth over long periods. So this analysis assumes long-term appreciation will happen, even though the path can be volatile. If you fundamentally believe real estate won't outpace currency over time, then the math you're about to see won't resonate, and that's okay. This framework is built around a long-term ownership mindset. Let me give you a real example from my own investing experience. Back in 2021, I was looking at where to put my money into real estate. At the time, some provinces were extremely hot. Prices were running fast, bidding wars were everywhere, and honestly, that didn't feel comfortable to me. Meanwhile, Saskatchewan had been flat for years. From around 2015 to 2021, prices barely moved. Instead of chasing the hottest market, I chose to invest where things were stable because I still believed in real estate long term. So for a while, nothing exciting happened. The market stayed flat. But over time, Saskatchewan began catching up and showing appreciation. I've seen similar patterns in Alberta where prices lagged for years before eventually rising. So my takeaway wasn't that you can time a market. It's the desirable assets don't stay disconnected forever. They move in cycles. And when you take a patient long-term view, those cycles tend to reward discipline more than hype. So why does rent versus buy feel so confusing in 2026? Before we get into the numbers, I'm going to tell you the reason this decision feels harder than ever. Rents are getting cheaper. There's a supply surge happening. Mortgage renewals are hitting and could add more homes to the market. And home prices aren't moving up the way that people are used to. To understand rent versus buy in 2026, you have to understand the rental market first. There's been a shift in the rental market, and it just isn't a feeling, it's actually backed by data. So according to the 2025 CMHC Rental Market Report, Canada's rental market softened in 2025. After several years of intense pressure, more supply combined with slower demand shifted conditions more in favor of renters. So here are some key takeaways from the report. 1, vacancy rates rose. That increased in Canada's major cities and its connected suburbs. So more rental buildings were completed. For example, through 2026-2027, there's expected to be 180,000 purpose-built rental units, increasing the rental supply by 7%. The average vacancy rate for purpose-built rental apartments rose to 3.1% from 2024, and this rate is now above its 10-year average. Affordable rental units in most markets remain in high demand, but for the higher-end rental units, vacancy rates are still above average, but have tightened in some markets over the last year due to renters moving up to higher-priced or newly built units. Because so many new high-end units have arrived at once, vacancy rates for these units have tightened, but competition among landlords has increased. Landlords are offering incentives to attract renters, making newly built homes more attainable. So purpose-built rental operators also responded to the market conditions by offering incentives to new tenants, such as 1 month of free rent or moving allowances and signing bonuses. Major cities like Vancouver and Toronto recorded their highest vacancy levels in years, and the result, renters have more choice and more negotiating power. Number 2, rent growth slowed, especially for new tenants. Average rents paid by all tenants still increased by about 5%, but growth slowed compared to prior years, and more importantly, in several major cities, rent for new leases declined. Landlords offered incentives, like free rent or bonuses, to fill vacant units, and the gap between rents paid by new tenants and existing tenants began to shrink. The result? Pressure on rents is easing. So all that said leads us to number 3, supply surge and demand cooling. As I mentioned a minute ago, Rental supply increased because record purpose-built rental construction, more condo owners renting out units. At the same time, housing demand cooled due to slower immigration, fewer international students, softer labor markets. Population growth, a key driver of housing demand, slowed sharply as immigration policy changes reduced the number of new arrivals. Rental demand also declined as study and work permit holders in the 15 to 34 demographic, the primary drivers of rental household formation, left the country. This trend was particularly noticeable in BC and Ontario, where we saw the most decline for the young adult population. These provinces, which are popular destinations for international students, were the hardest hit by fewer admissions. Slower hiring and rising unemployment limited new household formation, while overall employment appeared stable over the past year. Underlying weakness was concentrated in export-focused regions impacted by trade uncertainty. It's not surprising that renting feels easier in 2026. And spoiler alert, it's not wrong to say renting is cheaper right now, because in most cases it is. But there's something I want to touch on before diving into the numbers. Forced savings, something that most people miss. Even if renting is cheaper, that only helps you financially if you actually save and invest the difference consistently. In theory, that sounds easy, but here's something that most people don't talk about when they say, just rent and invest the difference. On paper, that strategy makes sense, but in real life, most renters don't consistently invest that extra money. Why? Because it doesn't feel like a mandatory payment. It feels like extra spending cash. And without structure, lifestyle creep usually wins. There are vacations, dining out, coffees, entertainment, unexpected expenses. The extra money gets spent. Most people lack the motivation and discipline to save and invest on a regular basis. But buying works differently. A portion of every mortgage payment goes directly toward principal. That is forced savings. You don't rely on discipline. It's mandatory. And over time, more of your payment goes toward principal, which means your forced savings increases every single year. Rent never does that. Now here's the main event. Let's get into the numbers. I want to remind you that this is just an illustration and not a recommendation. Okay, so assume a 2-bedroom condo in Greater Vancouver. Purchase price is $650,000, down payment of 10%, so $65,000, and your mortgage is $585,000, plus mortgage insurance premium of $19,000 since you're putting less than 20% down. So your total mortgage is $604,305. You get a rate of 3.74 fixed, amortization over 30 years, and your monthly payment becomes $2,785. So let's break down the total monthly costs for buying. Mortgage payment is $2,785. You have your strata, your property tax, insurance, other maintenance costs since things can break or need to be replaced. Your total monthly outflow would be $3,615. Note that the principal paid in year one, it would be about $932 a month, and in interest, about $1,853 per month. Then there's renting. So say you're renting the same 2-bedroom apartment, so your rent is $2,500 per month. Well, that would be the same as your total monthly outflow, since right now there's not really any additional cost. Before, it was common to have additional fees such as parking, storage, pet fees, etc. But in this softening rental market we're in today, many landlords and rental building operators are staying competitive by offering incentives to renters, so I'm not going to account for any additional costs. The difference? $1,115 per month. Yes, buying costs more monthly, but remember, $932 of that monthly outflow when you buy is forced savings. To match that outcome, a renter would need to save and invest $932 every single month. Most people don't do that. That's the difference. Next, I want to show you the difference between equity and return on investment. So equity is what you own in the property at a certain point in time. You build equity in 2 ways. Number 1, paying down your mortgage, which is forced savings. And number 2, appreciation. The market increases the property value over time. So here's how you calculate home equity. You take the current appraised value minus total loan balance equals your home equity. If value stays flat at $650,000, what's my equity after 5 years? Well, after 5 years, your mortgage balance remaining would be about $543,989. So this would make your equity $106,011. Just for comparison, let's assume a 3% annual appreciation, which is not unheard of in Greater Vancouver real estate. Now we have a 5-year value of $753,528. And with the same mortgage balance remaining, your equity would now be around $209,539. Sounds great, but most industry experts are aligned with their forecasts that prices are expected to stay flat. So to make it more realistic, let's take this further and go with a longer time period. What's my equity after 10 years? While still using the 3% annual appreciation, your market value would be $873,546, less your mortgage balance remaining. In this case, it would be $471,396. So your home equity would be $402,150. Let's pause for a minute here. Remember, equity is not the same as your return on investment, also known as ROI. Equity is not liquid. It's net worth tied up in the property. It's not cash unless you sell or borrow against it. Your money is locked in. So ROI measures how well your money is working for you. Here's how you calculate real ROI. It looks at appreciation, mortgage pay down, rental income if applicable, cash flow, and how much money you actually invested. In our example, there are two other factors that we haven't covered yet: closing costs at the time of purchase and selling costs at the time of sale. Here's how you calculate your return on investment on a primary residence. So you would have your sale price, less your purchase price, less your selling costs, and less any improvements that you would have put in, divided by your total cash invested, and times that by 100, and you get your ROI. Simplified, this is your net profit divided by your initial investment times 100. But remember, your total initial investment isn't just the down payment. There were also closing costs. How much did I actually invest? There are two components to this: down payment and closing costs. So as you remember, the down payment was $65,000. And let's break down the mortgage closing costs. There's property transfer tax, which is usually the largest expense for a buyer, and in this case, it's $11,000. But note that first-time buyers may be eligible for an exemption, reducing or eliminating this cost. Legal fees, inspection or appraisal fees, title insurance, making the estimated closing cost $13,400. Plus, there would be some property tax adjustments that were prepaid by the seller, but I didn't include that amount because it really depends since it's prorated. So let's just call it $15,000, the amount paid for closing costs, which is an expense for the buyer. So your total cash invested would be $65,000 down payment plus $15,000 closing costs, making our total $80,000. How much will my selling costs be? Selling costs can vary, but the main one is realtor fees, and generally the typical commission structure in BC is 7% on the first $100,000 and 2.5% to 3% on the remaining balance. In this case, for after 5 years, at a 3% annual appreciation for the property in question, the estimated selling costs would be about $23,000. What's my ROI after 5 years? Well, let's pull everything together. So we have our selling price, less our original purchase price, less the selling costs, and assume zero for improvements. We get a profit of $80,300. Of course, there would be other costs associated with selling that includes legal fees, preparation costs, moving costs, etc. But just for demonstration purposes and working with a round number, let's just say $80,000. So $80,000 divided by $80,000 initial investment times by 100, we get 100% ROI. 100% return on investment, ROI, in real estate means you have earned a net profit equal to your total initial investment. Simply put, you doubled your money. While 100% ROI sounds excellent, this metric does not account for the time it took to achieve it. Remember, it is a total return, not an annual return. So if you made it this far, you would probably also want to see what your ROI would be after 10 years. What's my ROI after 10 years? So again, we're going to take our selling price, less our original purchase price, less selling costs, and we get to a total of $197,207. So you divide that by the initial investment of $80,000 times by 100, and your ROI is 247%. That's a 247% total return. Again, longer holding periods reduce risk and smooth market volatility. Okay, so how realistic is the 3% appreciation I used in my example? Well, according to the Greater Vancouver Realtors January 2026 report, there's been a 65% 10-year change for apartments in Greater Vancouver, based on the MLS Home Price Index, also known as the HPI. This means that for this property type in this area, there's been an increase in value by 65% over the last 10 years. But it's not that simple. That does not mean 6.5% annually. Doing so calculates a simple annual average, linear growth, which ignores the effects of compounding interest. So we'll need to use the compound annual growth rate, CAGR formula. This tells you the average annual appreciation rate of the property, smoothing out all the ups and downs year by year. So this is the CAGR formula. And using the 65% increase over 10 years, we would divide the total percentage by 100. So that would be 0.65. We add 1, and we raise to the power of 1 over 10, which is the number of years. Subtract 1 and multiply by 100, and our actual compound growth rate is 5.13% per year. I'd say the 3% estimated appreciation used is reasonable. Now, let's take a look at the rental market and how it's increased in 10 years. According to the rental market statistics summary by zone for 2-bedroom apartments, the median rent back in 2015 was $1,075 per month. Fast forward to 2025, the median rent was $2,100. So using the same CAGR formula, we're going to use different variables, but the logic is the same. So we take the 2,100 divided by 1,075, raised to the power of 1 over 10, which is the number of years, minus 1 times by 100, and we get almost 7%. So over the last 10 years, the CAGR for median rent in the Tri-Cities is almost 7%. Rental markets may soften short-term, but long-term rent inflation is real. What this means is this pattern often shows up when prices have paused or cooled. Interest rates rise, buyer demand softens, price growth slows. So what's the takeaway in 2026? Renting may be cheaper right now. Buying may feel harder. But the real difference is not monthly cost alone. Consider other factors. There's forced savings, when your season of life changes, how long you plan to stay. I'll share another personal example with you. So back in 2022, my husband and I found out that we were expecting our third baby. At the time, we were renting a 3-bedroom apartment. It was a brand new, good-sized apartment, but we knew that we would need more space with a new addition. So ideally, we would have a yard for the 3 kids to play in. And we also had a neighbor who constantly complained about the noise and the footsteps coming from our 2 young children at the time. So the ongoing conflict got so bad, we even had the cops involved. So I remember our neighbor coming up to our floor and just banging on the door, asking us, why don't we get the kids to sit and watch TV so that they stop running? We understood where he was coming from, but we also knew we can't continue to live like this. So we started looking for a house, and we ended up finding a great starter home with a big yard in an area that we love. And when we found out it was just a minute away from a decently ranked elementary school, our decision was clear. To be honest, it wasn't the best time to buy because it was right when the prices started going down. But for us, our season of life and us seeking stability in a neighborhood we want our children to grow up in and having the space we needed to raise our children, it was time. Again, we weren't looking for something short term. We had a timeline of 7 to 10 years before we would consider upsizing. So for us, it was the right move to buy the house. So there's no single answer to whether you should rent or buy. Renting works for short-term flexibility. Buying works for stability and long-term progress. Neither choice is wrong. But drifting without a plan is usually the most expensive option. So that was a lot of information, hopefully useful information to help you decide whether you should rent or buy. I'm Evangeline, mortgage broker and owner of All Trust Mortgage Solutions here in Greater Vancouver. I know my perspective is biased. I get paid when I help people secure a mortgage to buy real estate. But like I said, and I'll keep saying it, I truly believe in real estate long term. And depending on your current situation, for some people it makes more sense to rent, but for others, 2026 may be their time to buy. My goal with this channel is to give people real and honest answers. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. So if you found this video helpful, hit that like button and subscribe so it can reach more people. See you on the next video.